He said, they reported that he rose from the dead. See, that's the New Testament, says the same thing. So he's trying to be fair. That's something a good Jew could have written. That he ends up by saying, accordingly, he could possibly have been the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have reported wonders, and the tribe of the Christians, so named after him, has not disappeared to the present day. So this is what he actually wrote. And so there's brilliant outside testimony for the historicity of Jesus. And there are 5 other major references, about 12 in all, but 5 other major references in secular literature about Jesus. So how somebody can come along and claim that Jesus was only a myth, I shall never know. Just quickly to tick them off. Cornelius Tacitus, first century historian, he writes from the 2nd century into the 1st, gives us a year-by-year account of what happened in ancient Rome. And for the year 64, he reports the Great Fire of Rome happened under Nero's administration. And Nero's throne is tottering because it happened on his watch. So, to keep from being overthrown, Nero then has to search for other scapegoats. And he lands on the Christians. First time they show up in secular history. He says, the Christians are named, careful scholar, he says, the Christians are named for a Christ who was crucified by one of our governors, Pontius Pilate. And the pernicious superstition was almost eradicated, but suddenly it gained new vigor again. You want an outside proof for the resurrection and Pentecost? There it is. Suddenly it gained new vigor and even flowed as far away as Rome, that common cesspool into which garbage flows from all over the Mediterranean. So here's a hostile source, doesn't like Christianity, so much garbage. But that very fact alone proves that his concession that there was a Jesus crucified by Pilate and had followers is absolutely authentic historically, because it satisfies the great criterion of embarrassment. Hey, I'll get over these sidebars in a second, but listen, I got to give you a couple sidebars here on how does a professor of ancient history figure out if something claimed 2,000 years later really happened? The guy may be padding his story, maybe telling a fairy tale. We know the ancients love to pad their numbers, the historians. So how do we know that a fact claimed by an ancient historian is true? There are 12 tests, but 2 of the biggest. First is the criterion of multiple attestation, meaning, are there a lot of different sources not copying from one another that agree that this happened? Then that's a pretty firm. I mean, a lot of people say Julius Caesar assassinated Ides of March, Julius Caesar, and it keeps going around. And yeah, probably happened. The other one is the criterion of embarrassment. You're arguing in a given direction, and yet you come across evidence that contradicts your thesis. But you got to admit it because everybody knows it's true. But you build a wall around it trying to explain it away, right? Then 2,000 years later, that problematical counter-evidence is absolutely authentic. See it? See, otherwise, they wouldn't have had bothered to defeat the argument. So here in a hostile source, it would have been in their interest to shut up about Jesus entirely. Tacitus thinks there's so much sewage. But he was an honest historian trying to figure out where this crazy sect started, okay? This is pretty overpowering evidence. Tacitus alone would prove the historicity of Jesus, but we have more. Suetonius, another famous Roman historian, writes Lives of the 12 Caesars, gives quite a bedroom history of them and so forth. It was a bestseller in the Middle Ages, by the way. That's the way it usually goes. But he says in the reign of Claudius, there was a big demonstration riot in the Trans-Tiber area in Rome over the claims of Christ. Yeah. Pliny the Younger, governor of Asia Minor, he was across from the Bosporus on the Asiatic side of Istanbul. That's where Bithynia is located, northwestern Turkey. He writes the Emperor Trajan about the year 110, and he says, Dear Emperor, what do I do about these Christians? They get up early Sunday morning and they sing hymns to Christ as if he were a god. So much for Dan Brown's claim this happened at the Council of Nicaea 225 years later. Early on. What do I do about them? They're against the law, aren't they? We got Trajan's answer. He said, there are plenty, yes, the Christians are against the law. And so if you can make a perfect case against them, I guess the law's got to be followed. But don't go hunting them out, and don't take any unsigned accusations which are inconsistent with the liberality of our age. See, there's a case where the Roman Empire is moderating. See, the persecutions were not one long horror story. They were on again, off again, on again, off again. But again, Jesus, as God, mentioned Christ and so forth. The Jewish rabbinic traditions mention Jesus. They're hostile also, but they admit there was a Yeshua HaNotzri, Jesus of Nazareth. They even give us the arrest notice published by the Sanhedrin for his arrest. It goes something like this: wanted, Yeshua HaNotzri. He shall be stoned because he's practiced sorcery and he lured Israel into apostasy. Now, again, you might, quick shoot reaction might say, wait a minute, this is no good. Jesus was crucified, he wasn't stoned. And isn't it terrible to call the Lord's miracles sorcery? No, for those two reasons, it's authentic. Future tense is used in this Aramaic inscription. Future tense. Haven't arrested Jesus yet. No Jew would ever written he's going to be crucified. That's a Roman punishment. If they'd have caught Jesus anywhere but Jerusalem, any time except for when the Romans were there, how would they have terminated him? Stoning. Penalty for blasphemy. Rabbis have this wonderful account about how God's creating angels went across the world to create the world. Angel in charge of the forest, studied in all the trees. Angel in charge of the seas, poured out the oceans. Angel in charge of the rocks, however, hit some headwinds flying over the Holy Land. Had to drop them all there. It's the weapon of choice. Anybody's been to the Holy Land, is that right? Limestone outcroppings all over the place. It's the rockiest spot on earth. So this is realistic. And folks, did you notice the criterion of embarrassment showing up in that statement? Sometimes I'm asked, can we prove the miraculous? Well, obviously, not to everyone's satisfaction. This one comes close. He's practiced sorcery. Now, wait a minute. Wouldn't it have been simpler for that hostile source not to mention that? Because sorcery and miracle are the same thing if you're not talking cause. A miracle is something extraordinary or supernatural with help from above. Sorcery is the same thing with help from below. But in conceding that Jesus is doing something extraordinary or supernatural from a hostile source, this becomes very, very important testimony. So not only do the rabbinical traditions mention him, the two references in Josephus, you cannot say both were interpolated, not at all. Second time, he talks about Jesus' half-brother James being stoned to death. It doesn't work to say that Jesus was not a historical figure. Just doesn't work at all. Even some of the big critics of Christianity will concede finally that, yeah, there was at least a historical Jesus. We don't believe it anymore about him, but at least there was a historical Jesus. And I think the critics who try to dismantle Jesus by using the approach he never even lived are using a false shortcut. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work intellectually. In fact, anyone making that statement should probably be embarrassed for having made it. Okay, those are the sources.